Chapter 1. The City of Smoke and Dreams. St. Louis, Missouri, August 30th, 1904. The air in St. Louis did not merely sit, it oppressed. It was a physical weight, a humid blanket woven from the Mississippi River's damp breath and the bituminous coal smoke belched by 1,000 factory chimneys. On this particular Tuesday, the mercury in the thermometer was climbing with cruel determination, threatening to break past 90 degrees before noon. But the heat was secondary to the dust. James Sullivan, the fiercely ambitious head of the Department of Physical Culture for the World's Fair, stood overlooking the fairgrounds. Beneath him lay a sprawling ivory city, palaces made of staff, a mixture of plaster and hemp, designed to look like marble, glimmering under the brutal sun. It was the physical manifestation of American destiny. The United States had purchased this land from France a century ago, and now they were showing the world they had tamed it. However, Sullivan wasn't interested in the palaces. He was interested in the dirt road that wound through the countryside surrounding the city. "The dust will be a problem, sir," an aide mentioned, wiping sweat from a starch-stiffened collar. "The dust is part of the test," Sullivan replied, his voice clipped. Today was the marathon, the crown jewel of the Olympic Games. That this was not the Olympics of ancient Greece, nor was it the genteel affair of the modern revival in Athens 8 years prior. This was an American spectacle attached to the World's Fair like a sideshow curiosity. Sullivan had a theory to prove. A proponent of purposeful dehydration, he believed that true athletes performed better without liquid. To prove this, he had designed a course that was not just difficult, it was sadistic. 24.85 miles over 7 distinct hills on roads inches deep in dry, choking dust. There would be only one water station, one, located at the 11-mile mark. "Are the automobiles ready?" Sullivan asked. "The convoy is assembled. The dust from the lead vehicles might be significant." Sullivan nodded. He didn't care about the lungs of the runners. He cared about the data. He cared about proving the American athlete was a machine that could function without fuel. Down on the track at Francis Field, the chaotic energy was palpable. It was 3 p.m. The sun was at its zenith, a white-hot coin burning a hole in the sky. 32 men stood at the starting line. It was a motley collection of humanity that looked less like elite athletes and more like the cast of a vaudeville comedy. There was Thomas Hicks, a brass worker from Cambridge, Massachusetts. He looked pale, intense, his jaw set with a grim determination. He had come to win, unaware that his handlers, Charles Lucas and Hugh McGrath, were packing a medical kit that contained not water, but strychnine, rat poison, and brandy. They were planning to run him like a combustion engine. Standing near him was a man who looked like he was late for a shift at a construction site. Fred Lorz, a bricklayer from New York, was grinning. He had a reputation for not taking things too seriously. He waved to the crowd, seemingly unbothered by the heat that was already causing spectators in the stands to faint. And then there was the little man in the beret. Felix Carvajal stood out even in this strange crowd. He was 5 feet tall, wearing a long-sleeved white shirt, heavy dark trousers, and street shoes with thick heels. He looked like a postman who had taken a wrong turn, which was ironically close to the truth. "Hey, little man," a spectator shouted from the stands. "Are you going to run in those pants?" Carvajal smiled, not understanding the English perfectly, but understanding the tone. He had walked, ran, and begged his way from Havana to St. Louis. He had lost his life savings in a craps game in New Orleans and had to hitchhike the rest of the way. He hadn't eaten in 24 hours. An American discus thrower, Martin Sheridan, took pity on the Cuban. He produced a pair of scissors. "Here," Sheridan gestured, "let's fix those." Right there at the starting line, moments before the gun, Sheridan hacked off the legs of Carvajo's trousers at the knee, turning them into makeshift shorts. Carvajo beamed. He was ready. Further down the line stood two men who seemed out of place for a different reason. Len Taunjane and John Mashiani were Tswana tribesmen from South Africa. They weren't supposed to be Olympians. They were in St. Louis as part of the Boer War exhibit at the World's Fair. They ran barefoot. The crowd stared at them with a mixture of curiosity and the pervasive racism of 1904 America. Nobody knew that Taunjane was about to be chased a mile off course by wild dogs, or that he would still somehow finish ninth. The starter raised his pistol. The crowd of 9,000 quieted slightly, the noise replaced by the rhythmic chugging of the automobiles that would follow the runners. Sullivan watched from his high perch. He wasn't just starting a race, he was initiating a survival experiment. He had no idea that he was about to unleash a catastrophe that would include near-fatal overdoses, hallucinations, cheating on an industrial scale, and a winner who would be carried across the line with his feet moving through the air as if he were still running. Crack! The gun fired. The 32 men surged forward. Immediately, the convoy of automobiles roared to life behind them, kicking up a massive cloud of red dust that engulfed the rear of the pack instantly. The runners weren't just racing each other. They were racing against the heat, the dehydration, and the stupidity of the organizers. The Marathon of Madness began.
Chapter 2. The Dust Bowl Waltz. The country roads of St. Louis County, miles 1 through 9. If the heat was a hammer, the dust was a suffocating shroud. Within the first mile, the runners realized that the greatest enemy wasn't the distance or the other competitors. It was the automobile. In 1904, cars were a novelty, loud, coughing beasts that spewed exhaust. James Sullivan and the race officials had decided that a motorcade of journalists, doctors, and dignitaries should precede the runners. The roads were unpaved red clay, baked brittle by a summer drought. As the heavy tires of the Packards and Popes churned the earth, they kicked up a localized sandstorm. The runners weren't running through air. They were running through a suspended grit that coated their teeth, clogged their noses, and matted their eyelashes. William Garcia, a runner from San Francisco, was arguably one of the favorites. By mile 3, he was coughing violently. The dust was coating the lining of his esophagus and stomach. He didn't know it yet, but the dust was slowly killing him. Within 2 hours, he would be found lying on the side of the road, hemorrhaging blood from his stomach, the lining shredded by the inhaled grit. He would be the race's first near fatality. But while Garcia was dying, Felix Carvajal was making friends. The little Cuban postman, running in his heavy street shoes and his hacked-off trousers, seemed immune to the seriousness of the event. To the shock of the serious American contenders like Sam Mellor and Thomas Hicks, Carvajal wasn't pacing himself. He was treating the Olympic marathon like a Sunday stroll in the park. Around mile 4, spectators lined the rural road. Carvajal, spotting a group of Americans enjoying a picnic, slowed to a trot. Then he stopped completely. "Peaches?" he asked, gesturing to their basket. The picnickers stared, baffled by this small man in a beret. Carvajal didn't wait for an answer. He snatched 2 peaches from the basket, took a massive bite, smiled at the stunned family, and sprinted back onto the course, chewing as he ran. He was running backwards at points, chatting with the crowd in broken English, asking about the local geography. He was erratic, untrained, and inexplicably fast. However, the hunger that had followed him from New Orleans was gnawing at him. A mile later, he spotted an apple tree in an orchard near the road. The fruit looked green and hard, but Carvajal was starving.
He leapt off the course, jumped a small fence, and grabbed the green apples, devouring them core and all. It was a tactical error. The apples were rotten. Within minutes, the Iron Man of Havana was doubled over with stomach cramps so severe he had to lie down in the grass on the side of the road. As the other runners plodded past, choking on dust, Carvajal took a nap, hoping the pain would pass. The crowd assumed he was done. Meanwhile, at the front of the pack, the prankster was having a crisis. Fred Lorz, the bricklayer from New York, had led the race early on. He was a strong runner, trained in the city streets. But the hills of St. Louis were different. They were relentless rollers, punishing the quadriceps. At mile 9, Lorz's legs seized. A cramp, sharp and electric, shot through his hamstring. He hobbled to a halt. The dust, the heat, and the hills had beaten him. He stood by the roadside, waving his arms at the support vehicles. A car pulled over. It belonged to his manager. "I'm out," Lorz hacked, spitting red dust. "Legs gone." "Get in," the manager said. "We'll drive you back to the stadium. You can get a shower and some clothes." Lorz climbed into the open-top vehicle, grateful for the seat. As the car motored forward, picking up speed, it began to pass the other exhausted runners. Thomas Hicks, the serious favorite, was slogging up a hill, his face a mask of agony. He signaled to his trainers, Hugh McGrath and Charles Lucas, who were following him in a support car. "Water," Hicks rasped. His tongue was swollen, his lips cracked. Lucas shook his head. "No water, Tom. It'll make you sick. It upsets the stomach." This was the prevailing science of 1904, the belief that water during exercise caused sloshing and weakness. Instead, Lucas grabbed a sponge, dipped it in warm water, and merely sponged out Hicks's mouth, refusing to let him swallow a drop. Hicks stumbled. His eyes were rolling back. "He's fading," McGrath noted. "He needs a pick-me-up." Lucas reached into his black medical bag. He didn't pull out water. He pulled out a small vial containing a white powder and an egg. "Sulfate of strychnine," Lucas murmured. In small doses, strychnine is a stimulant. It forces muscles to contract. In large doses, it is a deadly rat poison that causes convulsions and death. There was no FDA in 1904. There were no dosage guidelines. Lucas cracked the egg, mixed in roughly 1/60th of a grain of the poison, and handed the concoction to the dehydrated, hallucinating runner. "Drink this," Lucas ordered. Hicks swallowed the poison. The race was only half over.